Kia ora koutou whānau. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hairy News with Big Hairy Chewy there with us. And of course, Paula Penfold, the delightful Paula Penfold. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you both for having me. It's a pleasure to be back with you.
Yeah, I was thinking, I think this is number 4. I think we've done one for every documentaries, and this is because we did Emma, and we did Billy TK, and we did Disordered.
We made the mistake of having 2 documentaries that started with a D, and I keep getting confused between Deleted and Disordered, but I think we did Disordered.
And I was thinking about this actually. Welcome everybody. Kia ora, welcome. We'll give people a few minutes in case anyone wants to jump in before we rip into stuff. I was thinking about at the end of the Disordered conversation, which was March.
Yes.
I said to you, what's coming up next? Like I'll probably say at the end of this one, and you always go, well, we've got some things, but I can't really talk about it right now. And I was thinking a couple of things. You did tell me, I think maybe once we'd finished, that it was something to do with the protests. And I was thinking that it feels like quite a long time between March and now to finish it.
Why did it take us so long?
No, I don't quite mean that, but it just seems as if it was from, it was, is this a pretty standard length of time for this sort of investigative journalism?
Kind of yes and no. This one did take a longer than we thought it would, but it was really challenging, challenging, much harder than we thought it would be to pull together. To be honest, I thought it would be a 3-month piece, but it turned out to be a 6-month piece.
Why? Why is that?
Because it was so freaking difficult. There was so much material to wade through in the first instance because we had decided that our method through which we wished to tell the story was to let them tell their own story through their own words and video, but that meant having to watch it all. And there's a lot of it. So that took months. And then we had and Pat, you love talking about this shit, right? The technical stuff. Then we had a sort of dilemma / discussion about how to present this, because we have all this material which is their own content, but it's all terribly filmed in horrible situations with bad audio and on phones, but we needed to make it into a documentary. So we had to find a storytelling method and vehicle through which we could translate their stuff into something that was watchable and viewable without being really kind of irritating and annoying because of its poor quality. So that took a while.
Was that one of the decisions about like putting them on billboards and stuff? So it was like almost like it could be from a distance and it didn't have to be, 4K?
Yeah. And the precursor to that was a discussion about the kind of very premise of the story, which was that we looked at it in terms of their framing of us. And I don't want this to be a them and us story. And I'd love it if we can talk about that a bit more, because I think one of the major misconceptions about this documentary has been that it's damning the protesters, all of the protesters. It does not do that. It does not do that. So if we can talk about that, I'd be grateful. But one of the things that they talk about, one of the things that is said is that we as mainstream media particularly, but kind of all of us, but especially us in mainstream media, are, the propaganda machine. And, which is so we looked back at 1984, because 1984, George Orwell is what they throw at us. Okay, so we thought, actually, who's putting out the propaganda here? Because we know it's not us. maybe it's you. And so that idea of the kind of big brother broadcasting to the masses was where that billboard idea came from. But it also served the purpose of exactly that, being able to give us a way to make that shitty quality video translate to, the quality that we needed it to be. But the main purpose was trying to represent, it was a storytelling vehicle to represent the idea that these messages are not in this tiny little sphere that many of us don't access. They're actually pumping out like they're on billboards. Some people took it a bit literally.
Yeah, someone said to me, that wasn't really on a billboard, was it? And I was like, no, it's a tool. But
there might have been a clue when it said billboard graphics by Mandy VFX. That was a giveaway. But that, some of the people who said there were never billboard graphics by these people, they said that because they wanted to portray that we were lying, because that's their narrative.
So some of those people are pretty simple, but the idea of a 20-foot high billboard with Damien Dement ranting at us from his car, that gave me a full body like, ah! So yeah, shock value.
Good,
very high.
But you knew it wasn't real though.
Yeah.
No. Hey, I was like, this is a creative device, and I'm digging it.
Let's just set up what we're looking at doing tonight. Now, for people who know what we do, welcome to all the new viewers, and we can see you all there. We take comments, and do you want to put one of those comments up, Chewy, to show people how it works? We haven't been once before. We take comments on whatever platform that is that you're watching us on. And then Chewy today is going to, because we expect that the chat might be busy-ish, Chewy will be the chat meister Chewy, and he'll be going through them as we're talking and pulling out bits and bobs to add to the conversation. That might be a question, that might be a comment. And I have to tell you straight away, obviously, we're not going to be putting up anything vulgar or foul or offensive or accusatory or anything like that. If you want to participate in the conversation, you can. That's not what the conversation is going to be. So if that's what you do in the chat, then it's not going to make it. Super chats are always open, but even I want to make this really clear, because sometimes people send us super chats as well, which we appreciate. But if you do a super chat that's vulgar and foul, it still won't make it. I don't care if it was a $50 one. It's still not going to make it. So don't try and kind of get around the system by saying we got it.
We got to still try.
Well, they can still. You could try. Why don't you test us?
Take your money.
And the other thing is, we often throw to Discord. Chewy and I have had a bit of a chat, and we think that we might open up Discord. We're broadcasting right now on Discord, so you can go and check us out. Hang on, I'll put the link into the chat. Hang on, Chewy, let me do that. I think I've done that. It'll come up. Depending on how long we go and how we end up, Chewy and I might stick around, and if people want to get a hold of us or call us, quote unquote, call us on Discord, we might take some, but Paula's not going to be involved in that at all, because, to be honest, and those of you who watch us and have heard the conversations we've had with the Byron Clarks of the world and that, Paula, you're not getting particularly good response from sectors of the public right now, and we're not going to expose Paula to that. Let's just be blunt. We're not going to do that. So if you want to come on Discord and you want to potentially interact with me and Chewy, that might, and I'll say might happen at the end, depending, it's Friday night, we might be tired and want to go anyway, but we're saying if you want to go to Discord, there's the link, jump on and listen to us there as well, and that might turn into a conversation later on. Anyway, I think that's it. Is there anything else, Chewy, about setting up how we're running tonight?
No, I think just as far as the chat, I don't mind dissenting voices. Just have respect for the other people in the chat and our guests and ourselves, and we'll be golden.
Yeah, cool, man. Hey, Paula, you said at the start of the documentary when you were talking about should you guys even do this? Because this is, some would say, platforming these views, that old saying. And you said, and I'm sorry, I'm looking off to the side because all my notes are up here on this big 50-inch screen. You said about you were getting advice, stuff followed advice on how to report this. I was wondering, advice from who?
Heaps of people, heaps of guidelines, written resources for journalists internationally, particularly, but also from some amazing resources and people and groups who helped us within New Zealand about the work that they've done in this field, who know these people, helped us compile the set of resources. And so we went through them line by line. The one that has had probably the most international exposure is the Data and Society report called Oxygen of Amplification, which is an incredible body of work actually for anyone, not just journalists. The point of it is to help journalists work through reporting dangerous speech. But It's an interesting read for anyone who's interested in what happened around Trump and how the media got that wrong. And it's lessons that have been written down now for journalists internationally about what not to do and also what to do. And so we followed that script very, very closely about how to not platform and how to put things in context. And it helped us make some quite unusual editorial decisions about how we would make this documentary.
Right. It's interesting. So you followed kind of journalistic principles, and it's kind of literally what you're saying, and good advice from the experts, sort of contrary to everything people are being accused of. You sort of did the journalistic thing.
Well, yes, and I can see why people have accused the main screaming allegation thrown at us repeatedly is you didn't give them the right of reply. And ordinarily that's a really, really fair accusation to make, because we didn't give them the right of reply intentionally. And we've written about this, and we've written at length about our rationale for that. But if I can briefly summarize it.
Sure.
There were a number of reasons. First of which, the documentary includes their own words. Like, do they want to reply to their own words? Because that's what's in there. These are their own words. They're in there. The same thing is they've had, I don't know how many, hundreds or thousands of hours of video and webinars and email. Their content is out there, and it has been unchallenged largely. I mean, there's been incredible work done by many New Zealand journalists in this field, but we wanted to bring it to light in a different way, which was video. So many hundreds and thousands of hours of their material. And so our rationale was that we wanted to bring the right of reply to what they'd already published. And the third thing, which is direct advice from that guidance that I've been talking about, is when you're reporting dangerous speech, and let's not mince words, this is dangerous speech that we were reporting, don't give the people who are making the dangerous speech a platform to repeat their dangerous speech, right? A platform equal to the danger that they've already disseminated. So we had a really strict and thorough and rigorous editorial process and conversations around this, because I've never done this before in, a very long time as a journalist. I've never elected to not give a right of reply. We knew we'd be criticised, and of course we have been roundly condemned for this by the people who we've criticised and their followers. But I stand by that editorial decision for the reasons that I've just set out.
It is interesting though as well, because like Chantal Baker has 100,000 people on her Facebook, right? She doesn't, she went on the platform earlier, and Sean Plunkett was like, we felt, I wrote it down, we felt someone should give Chantal the right of reply. Chantal's got a 4 times bigger audience than he does. So I don't know why he thinks that he can give her the right of reply when she can just flick the camera on and do it herself. And she did. And I wonder if maybe in this current age we live in, that right of reply is a little bit moot in some instances, because if these people have massive audiences anyway, they do have the right of reply. They flick on their camera and they reply.
They've absolutely had the reply. I mean, the fact that Counterspin did an emergency broadcast called something or other, I didn't watch it, but I've seen some of the comments that were made in it. The fact that it took them 3 hours to respond to our 1 hour program, you know, they have plenty of opportunity for right of reply.
Yeah. No, it's fair. I think you said in the documentary that you haven't experienced this kind of, I don't know if you said violent pushback, but certainly aggression and violence anywhere in the world. I mean, where have you been an investigative journalist? What war kind of areas have you been in to give us a context of how you can compare that to this is the worst?
Well, we've been to Afghanistan twice, and you know, we get security training as journalists, hostile environment training when we go to places like that. So Afghanistan twice, the Philippines 4 times, which is one of the world's most dangerous countries to be a journalist. One of our most terrible decision-making processes was in Mexico, when we thought that we would be fine to do a particular job and we were really wrong. But I refer to that hostile environment training because when we have that hostile environment training, it's because we need to be prepared and reminded about situational awareness and things like always having an exit route when you're in a particular situation and having a plan. You know, we used that to a degree in places like Afghanistan, but we used it full on in Wellington. And that makes me really sad, not just as a journalist, but as a citizen, that our hostile environment training is most useful in our own country. What the hell? What's gone wrong?
Yeah, I think I spotted a little bit of that just when you were literally getting hounded out, but I just noticed the body language.
Yeah, how you were walking.
You were, shoulders rolled, small. I said that straight there is someone that knows it's going very south, and it's just I can't antagonize this person. I've got to get out.
I didn't realize it was that obvious, but you're absolutely right. That's exactly how we felt. And Louisa Cleve, our Stuff Circuit producer, and I were talking about it the other day. And, I was kind of too scared to look back at this, what was going on behind us, but I also really wanted to know what was going on behind us. But when she looks at that footage, she sees herself looking behind us because she needed to know, because it was incredibly threatening. And that wasn't even the worst time. That was just a time that was captured on camera. Some of the worst moments weren't captured on camera. And I'm not looking for sympathy as a journalist because, one of my colleagues reminded me that no one really actually cares about, no one cares about journalists particularly. But my point in raising this, and I'm grateful to discuss this, and our point in putting it in the documentary is that it's not about us as kind of individuals, or as journalists even, but it's about our collective role in our democracy. And I'm always hesitant to talk about that because it sounds sort of so self-important. But I do really believe that it's under threat. One of the pillars of our democracy is under threat when people won't let us report.
Yeah.
It's a protest. We're journalists. I've reported on, I don't know how many protests in 30 years as a journalist. I've never been treated like that in this country or anywhere else. So what's gone wrong? I mean, we know what's gone wrong, but what do we do about it?
Let me give an example, though, as well, because there's this juxtaposition, and I interviewed Jason from Op Shop. Sorry, the surname's just jumped out of my head.
Kerrison,
yeah. from Op Shop, and we talked a bit about it. And Jason was like, I did a podcast with him, a DOC podcast, and Jason was all peace and love. You know, it was great, peace and love, and that's fine. We had a bit of pushback and a bit of disagreement on some of these things, but that was his experience. And at the start of the documentary, there's people singing peace and love and peace and love. And I look, I don't want to talk necessarily about Chantal heavily. I don't know Chantal. I've actually interacted with her over Facebook, and I might actually talk to her because you know, I mean, I like having these conversations,
right.
and I might that might happen at some stage, but the curtain was raised a little bit when she was talking to Sean Plunkett this week. I don't know if you've heard the interview or not, but I want to play you 30 seconds of it, right? And this is the conversation, part of the conversation between Sean Plunkett and Chantal Baker, and this is what she said. And I'll explain to you why I think the curtain's been lifted after I play this little clip. So just 30 seconds of what she was talking to him about.
I never said to any media to get out. I was very clear. I actually went up to media on multiple occasions and asked them if they would like a hand interviewing people, if I can help them interview people that are balanced, that would be happy to talk with them to actually protect them. So I went up to media on multiple occasions because I wanted to make sure that they were actually safe once they were inside there. And even on the last day, I actually helped media away from the fires and helped ladies actually from stuff down off the benches that they were on. So I think that's a bad character assassination. That's completely false.
So the reason I feel like that's the curtain being lifted a little bit is, why would Chantal have to make sure the journalists are safe in the village if there wasn't an element of anger or violence towards them? In her own words, she just said
the quiet thing out loud.
Yeah, she said, I wanted to make sure they were safe. You've been to Afghanistan, to all these other places, and not needed that necessarily. But Chantal is saying actively, if they come into the village, they may not be safe. So I offered to make sure they were safe. To me, journalists aren't worried about, you know, scary words. The thing you're worried about to be kept safe from is violence, danger, aggression, that kind of stuff. And it just kind of spoke to me that maybe, and I'm not saying anything about Chantal at all. I'm just saying that I think was a good example of, like you say, when the quiet thing is said outside, and that maybe a lot of what we hear from a lot of the people that say peace and love was all that was there. Actually, they knew as well there was at least an element of violence and danger within that village, because why else would journalists need to be safe with a guide? Precisely.
And the corollary also to what Chantal Baker, I haven't heard that until right now. And I'm, what's the word? I mean, it's predictable that she would say that, but it's also provably wrong. So say it, but, you know, and keep on saying it, but it's not true. I mean, she may feel that she has done these, you know, gallant acts of inviting journalists in and protecting them. But you've seen in our documentary, which was in her live stream, which was watched by hundreds of thousands of people, when she singles us out, she points to us. There's mainstream media. This is your fault. Your propaganda caused this, is what she said to us, to her hundreds of thousands of followers. So she may well now be saying, in terms of trying to scrub the record, that she's been a kind and welcoming person. But what she does to her followers is incite hatred towards us.
It is that exact, and I'm not going to make parallels to people in decades gone past, but once you dehumanize someone, you then give the people the right to do whatever you want to them. And if journalists are being dehumanized and being told that these people are scum and evil, I wrote down some of the quotes from various people in the documentary, and I'll just read some of these out. Some of the quotes from the doco, these are either about journalists or about politicians. You know, that there's no legal outcome to your culpability, that we're taking these mofos out, we're coming for you, going to jail soon, we're going to construct the gallows. Beheadings were mentioned, executions were mentioned, media needs burning. They're all easier to throw it. I don't swear, sorry, Paula, so I couldn't say that.
That's my job. I do that.
That's his job. The man down.
Sorry.
That's why he's
It's
downstairs.
still ringing in my ears.
But once you dehumanize someone, it's very, I mean, like if you're it's easy to stand on a cockroach. You know what I mean?
I'm really pleased that you use that term, Pat, the dehumanizing, because I saw somebody comment that Chantal Baker, since that's who we're talking about, had humanized the protesters. And again, can we please not get into this sort of us and them thing? Not that you are, but that's what they've sought to do since. That she's humanizing the protesters, and somebody generously pointed out that she dehumanized the reporters and camera people and media in the process of doing that. And how I know that that's, not just a message that falls on deaf ears, is I saw it turn up on my Facebook feed, my personal Facebook feed, by some of my Facebook friends posting her live feed from the protest that I was at, that my Facebook friends didn't know that I was at, saying, "You media are scum." So I utterly reject her assertion that she's been kind towards journalists. She's dangerous towards journalists.
You go, Chewy.
I was just going to say, as far as language goes and that sort of thing, a lot of my friends and family know that this is sort of an area of interest of mine, some of these fringe groups and that sort of thing, and how they carry on online. I had a friend of mine watch Fire and Fury, and his reaction to that was, I thought you were blowing this stuff out of proportion. The screen caps and the voice messages from Telegram. He's like, I cannot believe that these New Zealanders talking this way. Like, it was so shocking. Like, he said it blew his hair back.
Good.
And I think there's this whole thing that with New Zealanders, you don't want to be too keen. You don't want to be the person at the front of the line. You know, I said to Pat the other day, if Jesus Christ himself turned up in Wellington, someone would tell him to calm down. To see these people so overboiled and just going straight to this Nuremberg 2.0, we're going to have executions and stuff, and other people are going, yeah, man, that's it. That's the idea. Is just so it strikes people dumb.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still gobsmacked by it, and hearing you talking about those particular words, I'm still dumbfounded by it, and yet I'm not. And I'd like to again come back to that, the premise of this, and can I just let you into a little bit of the kind of background stuff, is that for a while, so this was called Fire and Fury, right? And there's a hilarious conspiracy theory. You mentioned Sean Plunkett, who's come up with his own conspiracy theory about why we called it Fire and Fury, which we can talk about if you like. But for most of it, the working title for most of its production was The Inciters. And the reason for that was this was never about the followers. This was trying to prove to you, not prove to you, that sounds like we set out with an agenda because, of course, that's one of the allegations. It was trying to bring to light the conversations that you're talking about, Chewy, that most people don't see, that we were seeing because we were following them in, their chat rooms for months on end. And we'll probably need some, I don't know, deep therapy for a while after that, because it's awful.
It's a real behind the curtain stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we had been exposed to it a few years ago with an investigation that we did called Infinite Evil, which was into 8chan after Christchurch. And we sat in 8chan and 4chan for a while. So, So this is like a 3-stage investigation in a way, because we in those days, all the way back in 2019, this was literally on the dark web, right?
Yeah, true.
This is the difference. This is the progression. In 2020, we did the Billy Takahika investigation that we've talked about. That was moving onto mainstream social media platforms, particularly Facebook. And now Facebook's caught up, so they're shunning these people. They found a new place to congregate, several of them, Gab, Telegram, Getter. They post videos on, shouldn't even give you the names. I don't want to send people there. Don't go there. Don't go there. It's foul.
Hey, I don't want to talk about Chantal Baker all night because that's not what we're talking about, but I do want to ask you one other thing that came up in that conversation. But first, I also want to just echo this idea without obviously giving away anything that you've told us prior to this, Paula, but the other evidence that people can know about very clearly that this is not a peaceful group of people is that people like yourself and everyone we've heard about have had you haven't told us about specific threats, but all the other people that we've talked to have used words like death threats and violence threats and threats against family and threats against business. And if this is such a peaceful movement, and I'm sorry, but I've heard people say, oh, they've said it, but they haven't actioned it. That was in that Plunkett interview as well. Have they done anything about it? Is it just free speech? Have they done anything about it? And I thought it's ridiculous because I could say some pretty horrific things about you over and over again.
Is that what they say? Is that their defense?
That's been said at some stage. I don't know if I've got that clip. I can try and find it. Maybe I'll find it and send it to you, Paula. But what I was going to say is, obviously not saying anything about your personal location now, but do you want to tell us what you're doing right now, where you're broadcasting from? Just to give the context, you don't have to. I don't mean literally where, city or anything.
Obviously. Well, I don't really want to talk about that too much, but but suffice to say that what you've laid out is the reality, and I'm not at home, and won't be for a while, because the level of how do you describe it? It's not just anger and vitriol. There's lots of that, and we anticipated that. But the volume of it and kind of both quantity and kind of loudness is greater than what we anticipated. My partner's sitting over there going, and he's absolutely right. He's here to look after me. So
good.
That's nice to know. Thank you. So there is that constant, still, I don't open my phone that often of a day because it's just kind of annoying and tiring. The anger and vitriol, there's that, but then there's the directly threatening stuff. And then there's the less threatening but kind of veiled threatening stuff. And so what I would say about that is simply that, again, I would like to turn that back on the inciters, because I do feel as though the people who are doing that because they believe it's the right thing to do, because they believe I've harmed or wronged them. And they believe that partly because they've been spun a line that, well, particularly in the New Zealand context, but there's an international context to this too, led by Trump, of course. But the whole public interest journalism fund criticism, I don't know how much you've seen that arising, but they honestly believe that because we are funded by the Public Interest Journalism Fund, that somehow means that I must receive a script somewhere from the cabal and I read it out. I mean, it's, it it's so farcical that it should be laughable, except it's not, because they believe it. Can I quickly explain, I probably don't need to your audience, but can I quickly explain why that's so wrong?
Yeah, please.
Absolutely.
So the Public Interest Journalism Fund is a new thing that came out in, you know, as one of the COVID response measures because media companies were struggling. And I think most people at that point recognized that you need to have a media because, for one thing, you need the dissemination of information. And so people have managed to conflate that with there being a control over a message. And so in our situation at Stuff Circuit, the simple kind of way that I'd like to describe it or explain it is that we've always been funded by New Zealand On Air. Just because it's now got a different name under the Public Interest Journalism Fund doesn't mean that any of the process has changed. And can I describe that process to you? Because it goes like this. We send in an application, it goes to New Zealand On Air, they assess it on its merits about whether they think we're capable journalists who could deliver a program of investigative journalism in the public interest, and then they give us the money if they approve the application. We take the money, we make a program. It's like literally that simple. We never have a consultation with them about our programs. We tell them the topic, and that's a really important distinction, because did you hear what I said? We tell them the topic.
Yeah.
They don't tell us the topic. Then we go and make the investigation and we publish it. That's how it goes. I'm infuriated, but not surprised, because the very calculated message has been to have these inciters, followers believe that we are the enemy, and they use that term so that they can disregard everything that we say and only believe and trust what they say. It's clever, and sadly, it's worked.
Can I add a context to that as well? And I'm not someone who either at the moment has private funding or public funding. We do this because we love it, A2E.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation with Mr. Plunkett. I don't want to talk about him all night either for some reason, but he seems to be the chief person at the moment screaming about public funding. Now, as I pointed out to him, and I'll point it out again, the only reason any of us know his name is because of public funding. Fair Go and the host of Morning Report are his two highest profile jobs, both publicly funded. The only reason he's able to get $3 million from Business Mummy and Daddy is because of the profile he's got, thanks to public money. But now he seems to want to pull the ladder up and not allow other people to do their mahi in it as well. And if you were to say to me, Paula, which would you trust more? A secret behind door handshake with $3 million that does have strings attached, because I've explained that out when I talked to him about it, or a dialogue between a government agency and a group that then can be audited and checked and open in the public, which would I think is likely to be fairer? I know where I would put my money. So, take a lump sum of money from the government, make product with it. Take a lump sum of money from a business entity, make product with it. Why is this one okay, the business entity, and this one evil? It's a ludicrous conversation.
Of course it is, but he's trying to be relevant, and he's trying to carve himself an audience, and he's trying to establish us as the bad guys in the narrative because he wants to make himself look like the good guy who's doing I think he still calls it journalism. I don't know how he can call it journalism because it's not.
Well, it's very obvious.
He's forgotten how words work and what they mean, judging from his Twitter.
No, it's very obvious he's caught in the conspiracy theory alt-right audience now. And if you look at their Facebook feed, but if you look at their Facebook feed, anything that is to do with anti-vax, far right, alt-right, any of those things have 100 times the reach than the other stuff. So he may say he's not doing. I can show you. I've got this page sitting right here on my screen if you wanted me to. He might say they're not doing that and they're providing a platform for everybody. But I would say if the bulk of your audience and the biggest things you're doing are getting picked up by those people, then there's something about the product you're making that's attractive to those people. So it seems pretty clear to me. And when Business Mummy and Daddy's $3 million runs out at the end of next year, he's going to need an audience to monetize. And me and Chewy talked about this 2 months ago when he ripped an academic apart for writing about Luxon's dilemma. We said Plunkett's dilemma is very simple. He's either going to have to probably return to where he is naturally, which is a right-wing communicator and commentator, or he's going to have to bring on board those views from the alt-right because he's going to need to be able to monetize them. That's his dilemma. He offered Chantal Baker a job at the end of that interview. So, you know, he doesn't have a dilemma anymore because it's very clear he's made a decision as to where he's going to be, where he's going to go.
It's a pretty cynical endeavor to ride on the coattails of their popularity. They've got a big audience.
Yeah. It's 100% what it is.
The audience.
Hey, look, can we finish one
just
thing?
add one thing to that conversation, please, because we're talking about journalism. Because I used to respect him as a journalist. And the thing that I find troubling that we need to probably try to find a solution to, because he's not the only one. I mean, I find him pretty much indistinguishable now from Counterspin because neither of them are accountable to anybody. I mean, when I put out a story, it has to be right. It has to be accurate. It's fact-checked. It's legal. It has to subscribe to the Media Council requirements. It has to subscribe to rules, right? Yes. And if it's on television, the Broadcasting Standards Authority is the regulatory body. I mean, he's just these organizations in the past. The fact is, he's not accountable to anybody. He just says whatever he likes. And that's dangerous for our country because look at Alex Jones, look at InfoWars, look at Sandy Hook, look at the people who say provocative shit on radio waves, on the internet to get an audience, and look at the damage they do. And that's where I fear we're heading because there is no regulatory oversight.
Just to wrap this part of the conversation up, because I'm going to go back to his interview with Chantal Baker again, because we did talk a bit about threats of legal action against you. They talked about that in the conversation, and I want to give you a chance to sort of respond to it. This was Sean Plunkett talking to Chantal Baker just before he offered her a job, actually, about potential legal action against stuff.
We've definitely been defamed. We're talking with lawyers at the moment about the avenues that we can take. But again, that comes down to funding. We don't have large funders. We don't have large money behind us. Yes. So if the public come forward and they decide that they want to help us along that journey, that would definitely be appreciated.
So you would consider that some of the stuff in this taxpayer-funded documentary is actionable?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really make...
Just be aware. Sorry, we do this, Paula. Sometimes we stop the mid-range. She's just said she's been defamed, and when he asked very clearly, "Is it actionable?" she backs away from it.
That justification. I'm just going to talk to lawyers and get their opinions on it, but it does seem to break multiple Media Council guidelines. So that's a discussion that we're having.
Okay,
There you go. So, yeah, they say you've been defamed. I was wondering actually as I listened to that, is them saying that you've defamed them?
Yeah.
And if you haven't, is that them defaming you?
It's a very good question.
If you haven't defamed them, then have they just defamed you?
To sue them.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can barely contain my sort of equanimity. Are they serious? Are they serious? I mean, I think they probably are a little bit serious.
I'm not a lawyer, but in my opinion, this is exactly what the Uno Reverso card is for. So, just that's a freebie.
I'm going to play that.
I won't invoice for that.
I mean, let's not waste our time with going into definitions of defamation and how that's different from Media Council guidelines and how Media Council. If it was defamatory, well, how can it be when they were their own words? For one thing, did you defame yourself? Did you resile from what you said in your own words? clearly everything that we do and publish has been thoroughly fact-checked and legaled. It is not defamatory. Lots of people have thrown around the word slander. There is no slander in New Zealand, for one thing. The first truth against defamation, the first offence against defamation is truth. There's nothing that was said in that documentary that's not true. If they want to take money off people to try to explore the idea of whether they can even mount a defamation case, then, I find that really sad, actually, because there is no defamation case. People will be donating money to a lost cause.
Well, you heard the grift. You heard the grift in the middle of. You heard the grift in the middle of that, eh? At one point, like as soon as she said, "We'd like to think about it, but we've got no money, so could you maybe people would want to support us." There's the grift.
The books. Show us the books. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Tim. On that note,
famously hard up for money is Voices for Freedom.
Famously hard up for money, Voices for Freedom sort of tried to troll us a little bit this week by atting us on various social media platforms to say that their subscriptions, whatever they are, had risen by 400%.
Yes, I saw that.
Whatever that is, like 400% of what? To which my reply to Alia Bland, who runs their social media, is, it might have been somebody else, but I understand it's usually her. To which my reply was, that's a fascinating figure. I'm looking forward to your response to our questions about your finances, about which you've said publicly that you'll be transparent, but never have been.
No.
Right? So,
maybe their tax returns are under audit. Isn't that what that's the go-to is? I'll happily release my tax returns. They're just under audit for the next 4 years. Maybe they're the same.
They say on their website that they'll do it annually. I think they were incorporated as a private company, the three of them as directors and sole shareholders in 2020. Hasn't happened yet. So these people, when they have been, they say that they are funded by ordinary New Zealanders giving $25 or whatever it is. And I'm sure that's the case. I'm sure lots of ordinary New Zealanders are giving $25. But when and when I made that comment in reply to them about making their finances transparent, I got a lot of pushback saying, it's none of your business. Well, it's only my business. It's only my business, A, because lots of people are donating money to this company, and B, because they have publicly stated that they will be transparent about their finances.
Yeah.
Okay, bring it.
Yeah. But I think you should definitely contact a lawyer, because they've just obviously slandered you, no such thing, and your journalistic integrity by claiming you defamed them. So I think you should go for it. Hey, Chewy, there are lots of people who are chatting in the chat. And it's lovely to see you chatting away there to each other and stuff. There are a few that you want to bring up, Chewy. So let's bring those up. And we don't want to keep Paula forever. I've got a few questions I want to throw at you towards the end. So let's get some people's comments in there now. Chewmeister.
Absolutely. Are there plans to continue following the people of this movement for the wider public to be aware that they aren't going away and that they could be a constant threat to normal society?
Can I add to the question as well? I mean, we're getting now the reporting. There is a lot of amazing journalistic reporting going on at the moment. Citizen journalist reporting of various people. I'm thinking about Dudley here in Dunedin, outing all these VFF candidates and councils and stuff. So people are continuing your work on, Paula. But I guess the question is, what about you guys? Yeah.
It's so cool to see that. Dudley's doing a really impressive job, as are lots of other activists in this field. In fact, Aotearoa is doing an incredible job of this. And I've been really proud of my staff colleagues who've done the same thing, who've been compiling, not quite a database yet, but it's becoming that, of candidates around the country who, the premise of this was that we had done a story that said that Voices for Freedom the week before, had encouraged its followers to run for local government, but to hide the fact, not declare the fact that they're affiliated with Voices for Freedom. So we reported that, and the response to that has been magnificent, and it makes me feel really proud of citizen journalists and activists and mainstream journalists' commitment to upholding democratic principles, because we should know who we're voting for. We should have their affiliations clear, and we should be able to question them on those.
And what else we got there, Chewy?
We have, I
Well,
guess, a follow on from that. Would there be any plans, or would it be a good idea to go back and interview some of these people 12 months on, see if they had any regrets and I guess the fullness of time?
That's such a great question. I'd kind of love to. One of the people that we had in our documentary, Josie, was a reformed conspiracy theorist. And that was exactly the point of that absolutely Josie had regrets. Absolutely Josie recognized that. And I wonder, I think it's a really good idea. I mean, and on that note, you know, I don't know if you remember from the documentary, we went back to see one of the protesters that we'd met in Wellington, Ellie, and we showed her the footage of her being involved in that angry mob that chased out two of our colleagues at staff.
Yep.
And I honestly, here I am with my iPad showing her the video, and I quite honestly thought that the reaction would be one of horror and remorse.
I can't believe what I did.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I mean, I was really taken aback and not expecting.
If people haven't, let me add, if people haven't seen it, it's one of the quotes I put down on Chasing Out the Stuff reporters. The bit at the end, she said, perhaps they got a taste of what we've experienced for months. And then she said, I was not violent. Now, you know, violence normally involves a physical act, so maybe she can claim that, but she was certainly aggressive. She was certainly mob-like. But I also thought from that, you know, what we've experienced for months, what has she experienced for months to get like a mob chasing her? As you say, metaphorically, I was chased out of my job because I openly and actively chose not to get vaccinated. You know, like, what is she talking about? What has they experienced for months that would require that parallel to be drawn?
I didn't understand that myself, to be honest. And I don't want to, you know, maybe I shouldn't have brought Ellie up, because I, again, don't want to, it's not about the protesters, actually. And I don't want to diminish Ellie's agency, but the purpose of the documentary was to show how people are drawn and encouraged and incited down the rabbit hole that she found herself down. But
that does just point back to the instigators, because she's, you know, when you hear someone say something that they haven't experienced but they've heard from the front, you know, what we've experienced for months, she was there for 2 weeks, but she's heard from the front. It's been months, guys. We've had this for months. And so actually bringing her up, I think, is indicative of this idea of the ones at the top. It's like, you know, at a church with a pastor and all his believers just repeat what the person up the front says, you know, no matter how abhorrent it may be. I'm not saying all churches are like that, but you know what I mean, or a political leader or whoever it is. That's why that came across to me. It's like she's heard this, she's repeated it, but it's actually not her lived experience, because for months, you know, chased out of a space.
And back to your point about the violence and the sort of definition of violence. I mean, you know, that interview went for quite a long time. It went back and forth because, as I say, I was surprised, because I expected a kind of, you know, her to resile from what she'd done. And since she didn't, it went back and forth. So because we had this massive disconnect, because she kept saying I was not violent. And I said, you're part of a violent mob, you know, who are calling for my colleague to be hung. You can't separate yourself from that violence. It's collectively violent. But she managed to have a disassociation by the fact that she hadn't herself called for anyone to be hung. And I really struggle with that differentiation, because I don't see it. I don't see that there's a great deal of difference, frankly. But I have respect for Ellie for being willing for us to go back and interview her. The story is not the story that she would have wanted to be told, because the story that she wanted to be told and that Valerie wanted to be told was the story of vaccine injuries or doctors being silenced or scientists being shut down. That's the story that they wanted to be told. But I can't tell that story. I mean, there is a story to be told at some point in the future about our pandemic response and what we got wrong and what we got right, because we have got things wrong. There's a story to be told, but the story to be told now is not that story, because we don't have the answers yet. We will in time, but we don't have them yet. And the story to be told right now is how dangerous their incitement over their concerns has become.
Just before we go on, let me just say, because I'm watching the chat go past, even though Chewy's in charge of it, some people are thinking their comments are being hidden. I have a very strict filter on my YouTube comments. I've got the strongest filter on there. I don't actually know exactly. I've never said anything specific, but I assume that if various phrases and words and stuff that are used that Google, who own YouTube, would not allow on their site, then they won't show up. No one's in charge at the moment of removing anything. Nothing's been removed tonight. But if anybody out there is using a phrase or a terminology that Google has decided is not appropriate, then it may well not be coming up. But I mean, I don't. This is not a democracy. But this is. I don't know. But this is not a democracy anyway. I'm in fucking charge here, and if I want to delete something, I will. But I'm just telling you tonight, nothing has been. So we can just drop that conversation going on between several people.
And if I was zapping something, I would tell you. Yeah, like hand on heart.
Tell me this, Paula. I mean, for whatever you can, what's not in the documentary? Like, is there anything that you kind of left out?
Much.
But anything that would be interesting to us or that we need to know about that through whatever constraints couldn't go in?
Oh, yeah. And we alluded to it in the documentary that there are two people whose criminal charges mean that we can't actually report it at the moment. And the reason that that might have seemed pointless to tell you about that when we can't actually report it. But the point about that is harking back to the guidelines that I was referring to at the beginning of our conversation, which is that the guidelines say that there's a tipping point at which it's acceptable right to report dangerous speech, and that's when it's spreading beyond their own community. Well, it's spreading beyond their own community when they're facing criminal charges for alleged sabotage and threats. And we put that in because we wanted you to know that these are the people that we're showing you, but there are others who actually are already facing criminal charges over this. This is not some minor thing. This is not some whim. This is not some fancy that we're reporting. This is real, and it's dangerous.
One of the groups you mentioned as being involved in the protest was Action Zealandia, and they had a couple of members straight up under court martial for espionage. So there's some people playing around with some pretty heavy stuff.
We spent quite a lot of time in Action Zealandia chats and listening to their podcasts and interviews. I mean, you say, what did we leave out? We left out, there's a 10-part documentary series in this stuff. There's so much to say. But, actually the documentary that I'd really like to make, partly maybe as some kind of healing, is the conversation that we should be having, which is to be asking ourselves questions about, aside from the mechanisms and structures and people that we've alerted you to in Fire and Fury, aside from that, what are the other reasons? And we didn't go into that. We did in some of the supporting print copy about long poverty and disconnection and so many factors that led people to be drawn towards these cult-like leaders, there are so many understandable factors that we as a society have to wrestle with, and we also have to wrestle with how to bring them back. And it's not by demonizing them, and it's not by mocking them, and it's not by countering their facts with facts. It's about trying to welcome them back into our lives with aroha and empathy and understanding for how it happened. And I hope that doesn't sound condescending, because I really don't want it to. I just want it to provoke a discussion, prompt a discussion that we all need to have, because we can't just cut people off. We've all got one of them in our family or amongst our friends. We can't just cut them off. I had a conversation this week with someone. I can't give you the connection, but it deeply affected me about their heartbreak about their family member who's gone this way, and how hard they've tried to bring them back. And we need to, maybe that's the next documentary, is the healing stage, the fixing stage, bringing people home.
Well, speaking of the next stage, the documentary ends almost fairly ominously. Talk of a forthcoming attack, or reports of being aware of a forthcoming attack, or the very end of it, when it's talking about what the secret agencies are talking about right now. Is there anything you can expand on for that? What we need to know? Maybe just unpack that a little bit before we wrap up.
No, not really, to be honest. I mean, the advice is summarized within those lines at the end of the documentary, which was essentially a warning from monitoring international politically motivated violent extremists, and from the knowledge that the agencies have here, that there is the intent and the capability to carry out an act of politically motivated violent extremism in reprisal for the shutting down of the Wellington occupation. And that's chilling. It's so chilling to me, because it's not fanciful. We portrayed a fraction of it in our documentary, of the level of violent rhetoric that people are comfortable to talk about. I mean, I hope that it won't happen, but I fear that the agencies are right.
Hey, well, Paula, it's fantastic that you're able to find a time machine, and looking at the wallpaper behind you, travel back to the 1960s to join us tonight. This has been fantastic. I'm genuinely very grateful you joined us tonight. I mean, I 100%. Imagine that there is every media outlet in the country wants to talk to you, and I don't know how much you've done and how much you haven't done, but I always love speaking to you, and I really appreciate you giving us some time tonight. And thank you to Tim as well, who's been sitting there in the background, hanging out, waiting, keeping you safe from us. Maybe that's what we're doing right now. Late now. I know he's working. And I got to say, the documentary is amazing. I watched it twice. I watched it once this afternoon before we came on, and it was, so good. They told me twice. What's that saying? Whatever it is. But I think everyone should watch it. And look, I actually really like how you've restated this is not about the people at the protest. And I think when you say that, maybe I didn't quite get that as much from watching the documentary, but maybe that's because I'm a bit dim.
Maybe we didn't make that clear enough. I fear that we didn't make that clear enough. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to make that more clear.
Because you're right. It's like we've said on this show the whole time, and look, I'm not trying to be patronizing if you're one of these people watching, but I mostly feel sorry for people who think the vaccine is bad because they've got bad information. And maybe not so much now, because we all know that it can get past BA5 more easily than it got past iteration 1 or Delta. But certainly to do with hospitalization, it still has a positive impact on us. And for people who don't believe it, who have been fooled by the instigators, the people at the top, whether purposefully or not. Actually, I do have one other question on that. I actually mostly feel sorry for them. So I think it's good and proper and right. And I appreciate you saying it's not necessarily about the protesters, because, you know, we talked about is it called the Milgram effect the other night when we talked about, you know, the people being the experiment in the 60s where they turned up the electrical shock when a person got a question wrong, and the person in the other room was screaming louder and louder and louder, but the person in the other room was just an actor. And it was the person turning up the electric shock who was the actual test subject and didn't realize it. And the test was for how much can we get this person to turn the test up just by being instructed by a person with a clipboard and a white coat. And it was fascinating to watch how many people would basically give deadly amounts of electrical shocks because of being told to do it by an authority figure. There's also something, I've already done this once this week. If you haven't seen it, go and watch The Push. The Push is a show on Netflix for people who want to understand how this works. And it's Darren Brown trying to convince someone through social manipulation and social conditioning to murder someone in 90 minutes, to try and condition them from the start of the experiment to the end to push someone off a building. And so there's 70 people who are actors, and there is one person who's a subject matter who doesn't know that they are. And by the end of the show, that they've set it up through social conditioning to see if they could get that person to push someone off a building. So when you think about authority figures and what they can do and how much influence they can have, Neon's just saying, just finished watching The Push. It's great. Thank you, Neon. That makes me also think about people who have received the mis and disinformation as people who I really can hope will find the right information at some stage. And you know, yeah.
I like that you talk about authority figures, because it's a really interesting term in the context of journalism that we try to do, which is, you know, that old journalistic maxim of that it's our job to hold the powerful to account, right?
Yeah.
Powerful being authority figures, potentially. And ordinarily, as a journalist, I've always thought that the powerful are usually government or local government or whatever. But in this instance, the powerful are the people that we're talking about. They have the power. They have had the power to sway people's opinion. And on that note of The Push, some of the research that we looked at in the process of this investigation suggested that people's opinions can be swayed, and the beginning of the AI process that sends them down the rabbit hole can happen within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So, right. So,
yeah. So go and watch The Push. Everyone go and watch The Push and you'll get an idea. And let me just, on that point you've made, Paul, let me just say, if as some of these people are accusing our government of being communist or tyrannical or whatever, if you actually lived in one of those states, they've co-opted those words, do you think you would have been allowed to sit on Parliament grounds for 23 or 28 days? No. If that was in North Korea, do you think that they would have gone, sweat as, we'll just leave them for 23 days? You know, they've co-opted words and they're leaving them as a difference. My last question to you, Chewy, I'm not cutting this off if you've got any other questions to finish off.
I have a couple of things.
Okay. My last question is, though, these authority figures at the top, genuine belief or grifters? What is your feeling?
Both. Sometimes within the same person.
Okay.
And I won't identify individuals. I think some of them have been absolutely, you know, they say that they don't recognize themselves as conspiracy theorists, but they quite patently are. They spout conspiracy theories that are proven conspiracy theories. But of course, yeah, and there's this discussion about the whole 2% thing around wanting to feel like you're in the 2% of the population that's smarter than everybody else, right? And I think that's what's happening here. They do think that they have access to this particular special information, and the more that we criticize it, the more that they believe they're right. So I think it's both. They're certainly making money out of it as well, some of them.
Joey.
The quick point, The Push would be a much shorter program if they started with hospitality and retail workers. It doesn't take much to convince those guys. I think it's a really valid point to focus on the people that are leading these movements, because it's for a lot of them, it's just so blatant that it is a money-making, kingdom building exercise for them. And I mean, I was really, really quick to judge, and it took me a while to come around to the fact that if you have had the sort of upbringing where you can't trust traditional authority, you haven't had good experiences with the police, you haven't had good experience with the government or government agencies and that sort of thing, it opens you up so much to someone coming in saying, of course you shouldn't listen to these people.
Yeah, it's such a great point, Chewie. Absolutely. Completely understandable distrust of authority, and no stretch to understand why you would take the steps that they have. And I thank you for making that point. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. And I really felt that with I'm sorry, I've forgotten the woman's name, but the protester that you went back and spoke to,
Ellie
Evans. The way that she spoke, it just came out as like, this is someone that has gone through some stuff in her life that she doesn't trust, and someone has taken that and weaponized it. And that's where my anger sits, is with these people that are just taking advantage of these folk.
That's a really astute observation. That's precisely what's happened. And I liked the way that Kylie Quince described it in the documentary, which is that, you know, she doesn't want to take away agency from these people. And in that particular scenario, she was talking about Maori individuals, but the same applies. You don't want to take away their agency, but that it is clear what's happened, and that is precisely what's happened, that there's been advantage taken of vulnerabilities and concerns and legitimate distrust.
Yeah, 100%.
Exploitation of that distrust.
Hey, Paula, we love having you on. Thank you so much for joining us in this slightly different format from what you and I normally chat on, but it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm glad you got a chance to meet Chewie. He's a bit of all right. And if people want to find it, I tell you, I still get a little bit stuck when I'm looking through stuff for things. So if you just Google stuff and then Fire and Fury, it's the first result.
Much easier to Google than to search within stuff. Just Stuff Circuit, Fire and Fury, and you'll find it easily.
And you'll find it straight away. It's always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Chewie, we're not going to do any chats on Discord. We're just going to leave it there. And We're going to say thanks for everyone joining us tonight. We will see you 10 p.m. Monday night for another edition of Big Hairy News.